Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Stand on Guard Live, the question period. I'm your host, David Krayden. Yeah, I got a t-shirt on today. I rarely ever wear t-shirts on the show. It's usually suit and tie, sometimes jacket and tie, shirt and tie, turtleneck, polo shirt, but never t-shirt. But I think it's important we advertise this t-shirt. We need to think, well, it's still legal. And it won't be legal much longer, because and we're not hearing about it, are we? In question period. I also invite you to have a look at these wonderful stickers that we have. We just got them in the mail today. Here are the proofs. You can find them in the store. These are originals. We did not copy these or borrow them from anybody. These are original memes. So I hope you enjoy them. Just an update, of course. This is just hilarious. An update on the continuing saga of the disgraced speaker. So the Liberal Party is taking the blame for this. Yeah, of course. What can you what else could they do? Not the speaker's fault, the Liberal Party's fault. Not the speaker who's partisan, it's the Liberal Party that's partisan. So they sent out this letter here. Now here's the key phrase. I gotta put my glasses on to read this. Excuse me, because it's this is from the Liberal Party of Canada. Capital L, excuse me. The language that was posted on the event page of liberal.ca was the auto-populated standard language you use for events on our website and was posted without your knowledge and as a result of a miscommunication between the party and the riding association. This language is corrected. So, so, so you see what they're saying is that their advertising is produced by a bot. It's artificial intelligence. This they just. eh, I'm just making no. Just we want to hear this. Hold on.
Newfoundlander. He became known as a pugnacious critic of those in power, even Joey Smallwood, and that wasn't easy in those days. He would go on to be a political assistant for both major political parties in that province, and then a national voice. He would give fantastic, spectacular rants on the CBC. Yes, even I watch CBC to listen to Rex. And he would then go on to host Cross Country Checkup, where he would listen with compassion and respect to the voices of the common people. He would write many, many pieces of good works in poetry, in storytelling, in polemics. And that voice will now be missed by all. And so I join with all Canadians in saying, thank you, Rex, for all you have done. May you rest in the peace of God.
Very nice tribute. We don't often hear the Prime Minister do an SO31 or a member statement.
The honourable member from Cambridge.
But that's what we just heard. Just wanted you all to hear that. I know there was somebody on here last week saying bad-mouthing Rex Murphy. I just think that was disgusting. And I did ask that individual to take a time out over it because that's not what I want to see on my website. I had a lot of respect and time for Rex Murphy. He was a good writer, great writer, and one of the few columnists in this country who stood for the right things. And I say that in both senses of the term right. He was a fine columnist, and I did not know Rex Murphy. I know a lot of the parliamentary press corps. I never had the honor or the chance or the opportunity to meet Rex Murphy, but I think Mr. Poilievre's statement in the House there was very inspiring. I want to show you briefly which I think one of the best moments from yesterday's question period was.
The NDP leader is well worth ignoring, but I just can't help myself. He says that the Prime Minister acts like he has no power to stop all of these greedy CEOs from ripping off consumers. Who else has the power? Well, the guy that joined the government 2 years ago. He's been in power during the worst food price inflation in over 4 decades. Will the Prime Minister agree with me?
Okay, we're back to question period
with
here.
A 38%
Sorry
increase
for the
in homelessness and 1/4 of Canadians skipping meals because of a lack of money. The Bloc voted for $500 billion in centralizing and inflationary spending to add to the another 100,000 public servants and doubling consulting spending. They said they had no choice because the government was going to shut down otherwise. Can the government inform the Bloc that this spending would have been adopted with the NDP regardless of how the Bloc voted?
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I find this question somewhat hypocritical because the Conservative Party is talking about homelessness, but in their program and plans, this word doesn't even exist. I find it hypocritical of a party that voted in this House against all the measures that could have given homes to Canadians. And I think that, Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party needs to look at what the real intentions of the Conservative Party are with respect to the fight against
quick
homelessness.
comment here,
The Honourable
K5.
Leader of the
Thank you for
Opposition.
saying the truth about
The
this
Prime Minister doubled the national
idiocy
debt,
on the internet.
hiked taxes and inflation, saying that all this money would fund programs, generous programs, to eliminate homelessness. Since then, homelessness has risen by 38%, and 25% of Canadians skip meals because they don't have enough money. It's not because, with the support of the Bloc, the government it's spending all the money of Canadians. Why is the Bloc Liberal coalition forcing Canadians to feed this obese government rather than allowing them to feed Canadian families? The Honourable Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, it's so hypocritical. This party voted against this school food program. So when we're talking about feeding Canadians, let's start with children, and they're voting against it. When they say, yes, people are asking for money, we're giving them help. There's the child benefit, they're voting against it. And when we say we're going to help Canadians to have roofs over their head and pay their rent, they vote against it. Mr. Speaker, make up your mind. Do you want to help Canadians or cut their services?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the homelessness and hunger. He doubled the debt, increased taxes, and caused inflation, but said it was all to fund generous programs that would end homelessness. Well, homelessness is now up 38%, and a quarter of Canadians are skipping meals because they can't afford them. That's because his greedy government is consuming everything Canadians earn. Why is the NDP and Liberals forcing Canadians to feed this morbidly obese government instead of feeding their families?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the Conservatives who purport
That's all she ever
care
says.
about
We will take no
poverty
lessons.
and Canadians when every single
It's quite
time
obvious
they
you
vote
don't take
against
any
those
lessons.
supports, $10 a day childcare, early learning and childhood education. They're not supporting our budgetary measures to put food in school lunchboxes for 400,000 children, Mr. Speaker. It's unbelievable that they will at one hand say they support Canadians and on the other hand vote against those supports every single time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I'm grateful that the member points out that we have voted against every single policy that has caused homelessness to rise by 38%. We have voted against every single inflationary policy that has forced 1/4 of Canadians to skip meals because they can't afford a meal on their table. Mr. Speaker, the government has doubled the debt, increased inflation, and blocked home building. Why is it that they force Canadians to feed this morbidly obese government rather than feeding their families?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, our government is actually focused on keeping inflation low so that interest rates can come down. And I will note that inflation has come down below the targeted range of 3%.
Yeah, Steve.
And at the same time, Mr.
Everybody,
Speaker,
please hit the like button. Let's get over the YouTube suppression. They're suppressing my channel again.
Affordable housing. We have national
Thanks to
school
folks
food
like you,
program
we're
on the
beating
table,
that
Mr.
suppression,
Speaker,
just like we're
and we
beating
will
Trudeau's
continue
censorship.
to support Canadians with dental, with early childhood education, all the while the Conservatives vote against. Mr. Speaker, there's no plan on that side of the House. We will support.
Tammy, thank you for sharing that.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Everything about Maine is a
Repeats
horrifying
the
truth.
same costly promises the Prime Minister has been breaking for 9 years. Mr. Speaker, in a 6-week period, 50 homeless encampments have opened in Toronto. Let that sink in. There are a total of 256 tent cities in Toronto alone.
Amazing.
It wasn't like this before this Prime Minister, and it won't be like this after he's gone. Will he admit that everything is broken after 9 years of his government?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, when that member was a minister and had responsibility
Euthanasias
for housing,
are.
that there were more than 2 million more Canadians living in poverty. And the number of
He's
times
a
that he
killer.
talked about vulnerable people or taking action to help homeless, 0. He wants to hold out to people in a time of difficulty across the world that the solution is to cut the programs they need, to take away dental care.
Your solution is to kill
pharmacare,
people.
and shame on
That's
him
your
for it. We will
solution,
stand
Mark
up for
Holland.
vulnerable people
You
in a way he never
euthanasias
has.
are. The king of medical assistance in dying. You're part of the cult of death, which is the liberal government today.
The honourable member for La Prairie. The Hogue Commission has complained that the Liberals are still being secretive with respect
Anyway,
to foreign
gotta make a
interference.
comment here.
The PMO
Just a blockhead talking. Funny, when you put up that notice, Tammy, about the maid YouTube video, who stands up like within minutes, maybe seconds? It's the euthanasia czar, Mark Holland, our Minister of Health, or Minister of Bad Health, or Unhealth, or No Health. This guy is a walking, talking clown, but he's responsible for the cult of death that is defining the Liberal government, the Liberal Party, and increasingly Canada. Canada is all about death, whether it's in old age or sickness with maid, or whether it's through abortion before they're even born. This government is a joke, and all it wants to do is kill people. Talking about abortion like it's any real danger that Pierre Poilievre is going to end it or change the law. These people are gangsters. They're monsters. Minister of Death. Anyway, we'll put on.
Commission was precisely because
Sometimes
the
I
Liberals have been
silence the
covering
block
up
once in a while
foreign
because I don't think
interference
they
since
should
day
even
one.
be there.
The Commission was
I know
committed
a lot
to
of
put
you
an
feel the same
end
way.
to all that.
They
And
get
let's
in the
get to
way
the bottom
of
of this through a neutral, non-partisan
the whole
judge.
process.
The public
All they're
doesn't
there for
need to
is
read
their
all
own
the
pensions, their
confidential
own
information,
salaries,
but the judge
and the
does.
only the interest
That's
of Quebec. They have
precisely
no
her
interest
mandate.
in
If
Canada.
the Commission doesn't have access
So I don't
to
know what they're
all the
doing in a
information,
federal parliament.
Quebecers
I
will
say
lose
that.
confidence in this inquiry.
And when I
Will
worked
the
in the Hill,
Liberals
I would tell block
finally
members
be
that.
responsible and above all
I don't know what you're doing here
transparent with the
because
judge?
you're not here representing
Honourable Minister
Canada.
of
You're here
Public
representing a region, a province.
Safety. Mr. Speaker,
And this is a
the
federal
answer is
House
yes.
of Commons.
We
Go
will
back to Quebec
continue
and sit
to
in the
remain
legislature there.
transparent and cooperative with the Commission.
I
I
can.
agree with my
Nice
colleague.
to see you here today.
This is such an exceptional justice.
Yeah, I've got no
like
time
the
for
Justice
this.
Hogue,
The treasonous
and,
swine
is in
in
a
the
good
Bloc
position
Québécois.
to give Canadians the trust they need in our institutions. And Canadians have to understand that at all times, the government will ensure that the Commission does have access to all the necessary documents to do this important work. And I greatly appreciate the work I was able to do with my friend from La Prairie. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-le-Petit-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, its waters are warming too fast, becoming increasingly acidic and containing less and less oxygen. This is the worrisome state of the St. Lawrence River. Scientists are sounding the alarm. we've reached fatal oxygen level for several aquatic
Thank you,
species.
Jill.
The time has come to give the river a legal personality.
It's nice to see
But the Minister of
feedback
the
like that.
Environment is ignoring this
Comments like that
serious
are welcome.
problem. What will it take for this Minister of the Environment to give the St. Lawrence River rights to protect Quebec's biodiversity? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. I'd like to remind him that
Hey,
when
it's Disco
we came
Steve.
to power in 2015, Canada wasn't even protecting 1% of our territorial waters, and now we're up to 15%. And 20% next year.
This moron
at
is
least
strangling the
30% by
economy in this
2030.
country.
So this is our objective that all countries
He
agreed on
is
at
a
COP15 in
Greenpeace
Montreal.
activist
And
who put
we
on a
have
suit
established
and they put him in
record
cabinet
amounts with partnerships
so he
across
could
the
act
country
up like an
to
idiot. And that's all
protect,
he's done.
our territory. Thank you.
By the way, look it up.
honourable
See
member
if he
from
was the
Victoria.
extra in
Mr.
Saturday
Speaker,
Night
families
Fever.
saw their homes burned to the ground in northern
That's
British
probably the
Columbia this
only
week.
job you
And
ever
summer
had.
hasn't even started. Yet the Conservatives don't seem to think that climate change is real.
Yep.
And this environment minister offers up nothing but empty words and delays.
Yeah.
The Liberals refuse to invest the $1 billion needed for a BC watershed security fund that would prevent
people are
wildfires
mad.
and save lives.
Anyone who could
They
stand
knew
up and
this
say,
wildfire
Disco
season was going to
Steve
be
Gilbo
devastating for
is not
communities, yet they're
radical enough
leaving
for me.
British Columbians to fend for
I have to
themselves.
wonder what
Will
they're
the
doing
government
walking
fix
free.
their mistake and immediately establish a BC watershed security fund?
We need
The
a
Honourable
BC
Minister for
watershed
Natural
security
Resources
fund
and
so you can
Energy.
have
Speaker,
someplace
and
to go.
certainly, the issues that we've seen around forest fires last year and unfortunately this year, particularly in British
Oh,
Columbia
yes, the
and in the
forest
Fort
fires,
Nelson
of
area,
course.
have been
Here we go
devastating,
again.
and certainly our hearts go out to all those folks that were
And the
affected.
carbon tax
It is
is
the
going to
reason
stop
why
those
we have
forest
set
fires.
aside $350 million to help provinces
These
procure
people are
equipment.
addled.
It is the reason why we are
Insane.
actually training forest fires. And
Beyond hope,
fundamentally,
beyond
it is
reason.
the reason why we have a comprehensive climate plan to ensure that we are addressing the existential threat of climate change. Mr. Speaker, the
Existential
Conservative Party
threat.
of
You
Canada
are the
has a climate
existential
plan. It is
threat.
to let the planet burn. It
You
is
and your government are the
irresponsible. It is
existential
shameful.
threat to Canada. There is no existential threat from climate
Honourable
change.
member from
Anybody
Fort
with two wits to rub
A
together
hat-trick for
can
the
figure
Prime
that one
Minister,
out.
But not the good type. 3 reports released in just one day paint a devastating picture of life in Canada after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government. Food Banks Canada, the Salvation Army, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer all say there is more homelessness and there is more hunger. They kept telling us that they're spending our money for our own good, and everything is fine, and it's not their fault. Mr. Speaker, it's been 9 years. Whose fault is it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, grocery price inflation is coming down. 1.4% in April, down from
believe that?
1.9% a month before. This is
I gotta shut this guy up for a minute. I went to the grocery store yesterday. Few items, not a whole lot of things. $150. And you're telling me we have an inflation rate of 2.7% per annum. That is garbage. The books are being cooked. Anybody who has to buy even coffee beans knows that they've doubled in price in the last year. This is garbage.
And
I'm
9
sick of it.
years later, it hasn't fed a single child. They just don't get it. The very policies that they have delivered has given us the worst quality of life in half a century, the worst since the last Trudeau ran this place. In the past 3 months, 25% of young adults have had to go to a food bank in this country, 38% more homelessness after they promised to end it, and about 50% of Canadians are worse off this year than they were last year. How does this government have so much money to spare while ordinary Canadians are literally going hungry and homeless?
I'm worse off this year than I was last year, and I'm worse off this year than I was 2 years and 3 years ago.
From the deputy leader of the Conservative Party, my advice to her is to actually read the report from the
Oh, if
Parliamentary
that'll
Budget
solve it,
Officer.
just
In
that saves you.
report, she
That
will
solves
see
everything. Read
that
the
no less than
report,
50,000
and you'll
Canadians
realize,
are
oh,
supported by the National
Canada's
Housing Strategy,
okay. The
specifically
report
the
says
Weekend
so.
Home program that they would cut. We know
These people
they
are
champion
nuts.
an austerity agenda. This also from the deputy leader who made clear only a few weeks ago on a yacht, no less, Mr. Speaker, that less homes have to be built in Canada. They're siding with the NIMBYs. We want to build more homes, including for the most vulnerable of this country, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Stormont Douglas. Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
Yeah, get it
After
right
9
there,
years of this
Greggy.
NDP Liberal government, Canadians are hungry and homeless. It's becoming more clear. The more inflationary spending they do, the worse it gets for Canadians. And look no further
You're
than
right,
the Ottawa
Don.
Food Bank report that came out
Don't
this
forget
week
about
that said
shrinkflation.
500,000 visits were made to the food bank in our nation's capital last year. That's a 95% increase in the last 5 years, a 22% increase in the last year alone, and 36% of them were children. How many more times are they going to hike the carbon tax before they realize it's driving millions of more people to food banks?
Now I buy there's a bag of salad I always buy. It now serves 1.5 meals where it used to serve 2
children when
for 2 people.
He's going to stand up in short order and oppose a national school food program. A national school food program that Food Banks of Canada and Food Secure Canada have advocated for over 10 years because they know that it will impact food insecurity in this country.
Does this guy remind you of a character from West Side Story? It's like he's out.
400,000 kids, and the Conservatives say, no, we won't support that.
Where do they find these clowns?
The honourable member from Stormont Dundas.
Why are we all in House of Commons when these idiots make it? I always say that.
Exactly 0 children in this country. The only thing it's doing is feeding the bureaucracy here in Ottawa. Well, let's take a look and see what Food Banks Canada had to say about their poverty measures. Their report card came out this week, and this government got an F, a failing grade for what they're doing as they're driving millions of more people to food banks each and every year.
The speaker forgot to turn off the heckle mic.
It's only going to get worse the more they hike the carbon tax and make life more expensive. How many more damning reports need to come out before they axe the carbon tax to help with the price of food?
Now, you have to laugh because 2.7% inflation used to be considered no inflation at all. It's just ludicrous.
I'd like to share today some of the response from Budget 2024.
I'll have a scotch and soda.
As the announcement of the funding of the National School Food Program. Breakfast Clubs of Canada, Mr. Speaker, released a statement saying that this program marks a turning point in the country's commitment
It's your
to the
favorite barmaid, Jenna Sutton. She's here.
Best on a full stomach, Mr. Speaker. And investments today in children are investments for tomorrow.
I just can't take this woman seriously.
We will continue to invest in the well-being of children, and I think the Conservatives owe Canadians an explanation why they won't make these investments.
Yeah. They might invest in a bottle of beer with you, Jenna, so don't worry about it.
For Mégantic-L'Érable. After 9 years of this Liberal Prime Minister, Quebecers are hungry and increasingly taking to the streets. This week, there were 3 devastating reports confirming that the inflationary spending of the Liberals, supported by the Bloc, is hurting families and workers. And according to the Salvation
Right
Army,
on, Don.
25% of parents skip meals to be able to feed their children. How come the Bloc and this Prime Minister, who aren't worth their salt, preferred to feed this fat federal government rather than Quebecers?
Fat federal government.
Minister.
Words to live by.
Mr. Speaker, once again, I would ask
I can't even
my
pronounce this
colleague
woman's name. What is it?
to tell his colleagues from the Conservative
Sororia
Party
Martinez
to
Ferretta.
include in
Okay.
their plans if they're serious
And she's a
about
minister of
supporting
something.
Canadians.
Yes.
The word homelessness, fight against
Tourism.
poverty, investing in Canadians. I could give them some ideas, starting by voting in favor of programs that we're establishing to tackle poverty, rent, housing, and feeding children. I think that would be the very base. The Honourable Member from Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, this Liberal government, supported by the Bloc, has caused this crisis, and now they want to be applauded? Mr. Speaker, it's not only responsible, well, because of the
I've got no applause for
$500
them at all.
billion in inflationary spending that this Prime Minister established and the Bloc supported, which is affecting gas, housing, everything costs more. Many more Canadians are lining up at food banks. They're the one who created this crisis. Will the Prime Minister admit it's time to curb the centralizing government's appetite so that all Quebecers can finally eat?
What about Canadians? I'm sick of hearing about Quebecers.
The Honourable Minister.
You know, Christine, as long as you see
Mr. Speaker,
any of
I'd
these
like to
people on the front
remind
bench,
people who are listening
or
today,
the
and
Speaker.
Canadians,
You're quite
if it was
correct
up to
about
the
that.
Conservative government
We know that this government
throughout
is
the biggest
corrupt, and this
pandemic we
country
have
is corrupt
experienced,
now.
people would have suffered enormously, Mr. Speaker. Today, we're in a better position because a Liberal government was there to support Canadians in their biggest crisis that we have ever seen. And today, what we're asking them is simple. Adopt reform on dental care, adopt reform on food measures and housing, but they're voting against all of this.
You see how Parks Canada is letting new immigrants, newcomers to Canada into parks free? I'm just going to shut this guy up for a sec. I wrote a story in the Post Millennial. I wish I had a slide of it right now. But this has really outraged a lot of people because it's not just new immigrants or new citizens. It's anybody who is considered a newcomer. This can mean migrants. This can mean temporary foreign workers. This can mean anybody who's technically just arrived in Canada, whether they're here and they should be or not. And so they get in free to all the parks across Canada, but we don't. Citizens who have been here, who've been born here, we don't get in the parks free. It is outrageous. Anyway.
Francophones internationally. In fact, Canada
yes, Ottawa's there to support
co-founders
Francophones internationally. In the bloc, that's all they can think about. But anyway, I wanted to mention that to you.
That is a parliamentary, an assembly, APF, and we are going to continue not only to support this assembly, but also become proud of the fact that it is a great Canadian, a Franco-Ontarian, who is chair of this assembly. So we're here to be French in Quebec and across the country and worldwide.
You got a standing ovation for that one? Oh my God, you don't have to say much on that side of
correction. Just imagine, to protect a Liberal who denies the decline of French in Quebec, and also responsible for the decline
standing on
of the
guard,
APF.
everybody.
But the responsibility doesn't end there. All these new French enthusiasts at the APF read the OQLF report yesterday.
It boggles my mind how any party can be so obsessed, so much navel gazing about language. Just if one person less is speaking French in Quebec, it's cause for conniptions from these people.
The Honourable Minister
it's just
of Global
like
Affairs.
Children.
Mr. Speaker, we have absolutely no
who don't think they're getting enough candy.
The bloc, because we know their objective is
and this woman,
to show
she's not
that only sovereignty
qualified
in
to be a travel agent, let alone a foreign affairs minister or global affairs, whatever the hell they're calling her office now.
Recognizes that
she
there is
couldn't
a
plan
French
a flight
for the first time in Quebec and
to
across
Edmonton
the country, and we are
from Ottawa.
To reinvest
let alone one to Geneva.
in the improvement and protection of French.
And she's pretending to be a foreign affairs
across
minister.
The country, so we have really
another
no
one of Trudeau's
from
great picks. He chose Melanie for the job.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Oh, that makes me laugh. The federal government is Quebec's worst employer for French. Coincidentally, it's the main employer in the Gatineau region. Between 2016 and 2021, the proportion of...
Like anybody really cares about this? Try to get a job in Ottawa or in surrounding area if you don't speak French. It's just ludicrous that this jackass would be standing up, whining and complaining about the loss of the French language when you can't get a bloody job anywhere around here without speaking French. And I'm not just talking about a government job. It's been like that for decades. I've lived here far too long, I know.
Minister, Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, I am very proud of our Quebec participation in the government's federal public service. We grew Quebec's participation in the federal public service.
How many minutes have we wasted now talking about nothing?
To have public service.
We could be talking about the World Health Organization's
proud of Quebecers'
pandemic
on
agreement.
The other side of the river.
But
so yes,
no,
Mr. Speaker,
we're not talking about that, are we? We're talking about language again in Quebec.
That takes care of both official
because of these idiots in the Bloc Québécois who really think it matters.
The Honourable Member from Tobic-Mactaquac.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, more Canadians are hungry and homeless. We see it across the country with our own eyes, and it's now affirmed by Food Banks Canada's latest report. According to the report, nearly 50% of Canadians feel financially worse off compared to last year, and 1 in 4 people are going hungry.
Let's get these numbers up, folks. Hit the like button.
Demographics they serve are working families.
YouTube is stomping on me again.
Mr. Speaker, the character of a nation is revealed and how
So
it treats
sick
its
of this
most
depression.
vulnerable. And Canada is failing them. When will this NDP Liberal government get off their backs, respond to their desperate pleas? How about starting now?
How many questions have we had today about food banks? Now, yes, it's important. Not one question about the Hogue pandemic agreement. Nothing about the Online Harms Act. Nothing.
Food Banks Canada. We saw over a decade of the Harper Conservatives. They did nothing.
I got to get back to my comments. Sorry about that, folks.
Today, what our government is doing is we're creating more competition in the marketplace, and we're investing in a national school food program.
I try to pay attention to the comments, folks. I'm sorry.
I don't know how the conservatives
Sometimes I get
can say
distracted.
they care about struggling Canadians when they oppose and would take food out of the mouths of children.
Shameful.
The honourable member from
Oh, get off it. You haven't put any food in anybody's mouth yet, you hypocrite. Liar.
Mr. Speaker, just a couple of months ago, I visited the food bank in Oromocto, New Brunswick. Oromocto is home to Base Gagetown, Canada's largest military base. We were shocked when we discovered from the director of the food bank there that they serve upwards of 50 service
Dead on again,
military
Tammy.
members and their families. That's 1 out of every 10 clients they serve. Mr. Speaker, our brave men and women deserve better, and they are asking for this government to do the right thing. It's not more than what they can give right now. Why don't they start by axing the tax and getting off their backs?
Yeah, I put my other broadcast on Rumble, the Frozen Canadian. I'd love to do this live on Rumble. I've yet to figure out how to do it. But
vote against a pay raise, a well-earned pay raise for every member of the Canadian Armed Forces, and vote against that pay raise.
oh, I knew he was going to say that. I wonder why.
Pretend that they actually care about the men and women who serve our forces.
You think you care about anything except your stomach?
The honourable member from Regina Leuven.
After 9 long years, this Prime Minister is simply not worth the cost.
Good, thank you,
The
Tammy.
result from the Canada
Because
Foods Bank
I got
are
the door
damning.
shut in my face last week by her
Saskatchewan
office.
people feel they're
Not
worse
literally,
off this
but
year than
figuratively.
last year. 35% of Saskatchewanians are afraid they're not going to be able to
The
feed
numbers are
themselves
declining
or
again.
their family. This NDP Liberal Caucus Coalition can do the right thing right now and axe a tax so parents can put food on the table for their kids.
Yeah, Rumble would be a good move. I'm going to have to
Honourable
move.
Parliamentary Secretary.
What is clear, Mr. Speaker, is that that member and that party want to ruin the rebate.
Well, thank
for
you, Karen.
Canadians.
That's
What is also
I appreciate
clear,
that.
They've mentioned homelessness in this
Sometimes I
House
feel like I'm
today.
talking
Quite a
to
shock, Mr. Speaker,
an
and
empty closet.
hypocritical.
But
If you look at their
that makes
housing
me feel
plan,
very
it never
gratified.
mentions homelessness. They don't want to do anything on these things. And if you want to understand the compassion of the party opposite and of their leader specifically, look
How
a few
about your
months ago what the
compassion? You
leader
want to
did.
kill
He
old
went
people
to
and sick
someone's
people
home, stood in front of
and
them, and
anybody
called it
with
a
mental
shack.
illness or
They're a member
anybody
of
who
the
doesn't
working
fit
class,
into the
Mr.
liberal
Speaker. That's the
narrative. You
respect
want to
they
kill
have
them.
for working people.
That's
They're
the
not
kind
a
of
serious
compassion
party,
you
Mr.
have.
Speaker.
You phony liberal.
The honourable member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Liberals made the decision to expand the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which will result in 7 times
Well,
more
then stop
tanker
supporting the
traffic in
liberal
Burrard
government,
Inlet.
idiot.
People in Port Moody, Coquitlam, and Morin
No,
Belcarra are at risk of evacuation.
Dippers stand up
fire,
and
smoke,
complain and whine
inhalation,
about
and
the liberal
carcinogens
government,
in
and
the
they're
event
supporting
of a
it. They're
spill.
propping it
The
up.
government of
That's
BC
the
and
reason
the
we
local
still have
health
Justin
authorities
Trudeau.
are asking for
Hey,
a plan to
Ranita,
protect
Bonita,
people.
have you
Yet
thought
the
about that
Liberals
lately?
have no plan,
It's
and
your
the Conservatives
leader,
have
your
no
chief, Judge me.
concern to keep
He's
people
propping
safe.
up Justin
What are the
Trudeau.
Liberals going to do
So
to
what are
protect
you whining
Canadians
about?
in my riding and beyond from a
I don't give a
catastrophic
damn
spill?
about people in your riding if you don't give a damn about
The
them,
Honourable
and you
Minister for
don't give a
Natural
damn about them
Resources and
because
Energy.
you
Thank you, Mr.
want
Speaker.
Justin
It is, of
Trudeau to
course,
stay prime
incredibly
minister.
important that as we move
And this
products to
guy doesn't
market,
give
we
a
do
damn
so
about
in a
anything
safe and efficient
except his
manner.
own histrionics.
Certainly, the
He loves to
transport of
stand
oil
up,
by
wave his
pipeline is
arms
far
around,
safer than
and
the
repeat the
transport of oil
same
by
talking
rail.
points.
It is
Even the 10
important, though, that we
Canadians
put in
are
place
getting more
measures to
back from the
assure
carbon
British
tax
Columbians and
rebate.
Canadians that this will be done safely. Enormous time was spent on ensuring that we put in place those provisions with
Jonathan
respect to the
Wilkinson.
pipeline, but
What
also
a
with
waste
respect to
of
marine shipping.
space this
Certainly, the
man is.
Canadian Energy Regulator has played an important
He
role in
couldn't
that.
get a
We will
job
ensure
as a
that all
used
of those
car
safeguards are
salesman,
put into place
so he
and that
came to the
pipeline
House of
operates
Commons
in a
instead.
safe and efficient manner.
The honourable member from Timmins James Bay.
The poisoning of people in grassy narrows represents an unprecedented
and this,
corporate crime. For
and
over
this
60 years, the
walking,
government has
talking
covered up
moron. This
and
is the guy who
protected
wants to
corporate
put you in
criminality,
jail
and
if
the
you say
result has
anything
been a
nice about oil
never-ending
and gas.
nightmare for people suffering
Thank
mercury
God he's
poisoning that
retiring. He
impacts
should have retired
everyone,
years
including
ago.
young
Look at
children.
that.
We now
Look at
learn
he's the
that
very
Dryden
image
Fiber
of
Mill has been
decrepitude.
dumping sulfates into the Wabigoon River, which has been driving the mercury crisis for a new generation. So what steps will the Minister of Environment take to hold that company to a court,
Hey,
to
Disco
account,
Steve.
and to work with the people of
This is your
Grassy Narrows
buddy,
to
Disco Steve.
finally
Careful
clean
now.
up the
Don't insult
disaster in the
Disco
Wabigoon
Steve. He's your
River.
friend.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Gilbo won't even answer that one.
Tragedy, and all levels of government need to do better. Indigenous Services Canada is supporting several projects that will help meet the needs of the community without leaving home.
Look at her read her script. Look, the first time, look, she just read it 5 minutes before she got into the house today.
This ongoing calamity tragedy at Grassy Narrows is a reminder of what happens if we don't protect our water sources from pollution. That's also why we introduced the First Nations Clean Water Act to make sure First Nations have tools to protect their water sources and hold polluters accountable.
Look at that rapid fire delivery. She must have.
The Honourable
Member
Member
from
practiced.
Mr. Speaker, in conversations, women more than men face being constantly interrupted. When women express their ideas, they often go unrecognized until reiterated by a man. When women push back, they're seen as less likable. Negative labels are disproportionately
What the hell is
applied to
this
them.
about?
It's critical now more than ever that men speak up to defend women's rights and underscore their support for lasting gender equality. Could the Minister of Justice reiterate our government's support
What
on the
a bloody
importance of male allyship
stupid
and
question.
ways our government
Even for a
addressing this issue?
softball question, that is absolutely
The
beyond
Honourable Minister of Justice
reason.
and Attorney General for Canada.
Mr. Speaker, I'm an
How
ally,
large
and I'm
is the
speaking
bald
up.
spot
I'm speaking
now?
up about the epidemic of gender-based violence. I'm speaking up about women having full control over
Look
their
at this
bodies
loser.
and their reproductive rights. That includes the right to abortion and the right to free contraception. When we as men
We don't have a
make
right.
spaces for women's voices,
You don't have
we
that
not
right
only
unless you're
learn,
going to
we
read
help
that
create
into the
better, more
Constitution.
inclusive policies.
You
I
simpering
urge
fool.
every man in this chamber from every single party to stand up and to be that ally. The fight for gender equality in this country is a fight for all of us.
This is the half-wit taking our rights away. This is the half-wit who's taking our freedom of speech away with his online harm bill.
The Honourable Member from Kelowna.
When you see him next year, next
9 years
September,
of this NDP
he's going to be
Liberal
half
Prime
bald.
Minister, more Canadians are hungry and homeless. The government promised to end chronic homelessness in Canada by 2030. The Parliamentary Budget Officer found homelessness is getting worse, with chronic homelessness up 38%. The vast majority of homeless individuals in Canada, 80%, are homeless purely based on affordability reasons. This Prime Minister is just not worth the cost. How can this government spend so much with such failing results?
Do you believe this Justice
The
Minister?
Honourable
And
Minister for Families and Children.
Mr. Speaker, I have a really hard time
Jenna's up
listening
again.
to the
Oh, no.
Conservatives on that side of the House profess concern for Canadians who are struggling when we continue to see them vote against the measures that we put forward to support Canadians when they need us. Efforts to support and strengthen the social safety net, like $10 a day childcare, like moving forward with a national school food program, like moving forward with dental care to ensure they get the care that they need. We will continue to fight for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for
How
Peterborough.
pathetic was that?
Mr. Speaker, maybe that minister needs to fight for Canadians by actually listening to them and talking to them. Because after 9 years of that Liberal NDP Prime Minister, things have never been worse. Canadians are more hungry and they're homeless. The Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed what most Canadians already know, which is homelessness has increased 38% despite them promising to end it. But wait, it gets worse. From the front page of the Toronto Star, city to prioritize larger homeless encampments in new strategy as number of tents cities grow citywide. When did the Prime Minister simply give up and say, you know what? A tent is good enough.
The Honourable Minister for Children, for Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you,
Mr.
Twisty Hill.
Speaker, I've said it again. Once again, we hear the
Once
Conservatives
again.
stand in this House and
I think you all enjoyed me in
their
Friends.
support for Canadians, but I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that's not what we see day after day.
Yeah.
When we put
You were
forward
great in
measures
Friends, John.
like
I really
the
enjoyed you
National
there.
School Food Program to
You shouldn't have gone into politics. Stayed into
400,000
acting.
more children have access to food at school, what do we see, Mr. Speaker? The Conservatives vote against. We put forward the Canada Child Benefit. What do we see, Mr. Speaker? They vote against. We will fight for...
The honourable member from South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Thanks, you finally went overtime.
This NDP Liberal Prime Minister is not worth the hunger and the homelessness. This Prime Minister promised to end homelessness. The result of the posturing, long-term homelessness is up 38% because Canadians can't afford a place to live. More Liberal help like this will produce greater misery for Canadians. The NDP Liberal government doesn't understand that you can't spend your way out of a problem. When will the Liberals use common sense and realize that funding gatekeepers does not end homelessness?
And Debbie McKenzie, great comment. It is like watching a really bad reality show.
Anytime a Canadian doesn't have a roof over their head, that's unacceptable, and it's incumbent on all of us to live up to the challenge, to work together to make sure this is addressed in a way that's not politicized, Mr. Speaker. But they're not capable of that, as we see. He talks about funding gatekeepers. What he's really talking about is working with, for example, not-for-profit organizations. There's an acquisition fund that we worked with not-for-profits to make possible $1.5 billion.
I've said it already, Don. No mention of the WHO treaty. No mention all week. And I'll bet you there's not going to be a mention in the next 3 weeks.
From South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Well, let's take a look at the record that they're so proud of. The results: homelessness in Halifax have grown from 284 in 2015 to over 1,200 now. The housing minister gave taxpayer money to Halifax to hire 30 more gatekeeper bureaucrats. After 9 years, the NDP Liberal Prime Minister, there are now over 30 homelessness encampments in Halifax. Again, will the Liberals use common sense and realize that funding gatekeepers does not build homes?
Yeah.
Funding gatekeepers.
Secretary to the Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I point him to the so-called housing plan of the Leader of the Opposition, which says nothing about homelessness. So they can talk about this, but we know how serious they are. They're not serious at all. The gatekeepers that he talks about in this case are really municipal officials, mayors and councillors, for example, and others, who have seen in Halifax, in London, Ontario, in Brampton, across the country, 170 plus communities who understand that zoning changes are fundamental to getting more homes built. Missing middle housing, excuse me, Mr. Speaker, fourplexes, duplexes, triplexes, all of that is made possible, and they're against it, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Drummond. Today, we're here debating federal encroachment on Quebec and provincial jurisdictions.
Is that what we're here for, Martin?
Example is the research chairs.
God.
The federal government is meddling in higher education and determining which fields of
We're
study
here to talk about
universities
the federal government encroaching on Quebec. That's the only thing that matters to a blockhead like me.
With their EDI criteria, Ottawa is deciding not only what subjects will be studied, but who teaches them. Ottawa is literally taking control over our universities.
You know how I would describe question period? It's like 5 different agendas, if you will. And you just get going in one subject area that starts to get interesting. And then some blockhead will stand up and bring it all back to my language is disappearing in Quebec again. And just totally derail the process. And then you get the NDP coming up whining about why is the Liberal not doing enough, and we're propping them up. Can't they understand? Then you get a moron like this standing up, waving his arms, screeching in French. Thank God we have the translator because his voice in English is just too much to bear.
But not by answers like that. Isabelle Haché gave the example of 2 computer science professor positions at UW, one open strictly to sexual and gender minorities and the other only to racialized minorities. Forget about merit. It's like the case of a biology professor at Laval University 2 years ago. Who cares about qualifications? The university explained that they were simply complying with federal requirements. Ottawa has it wrong. You don't fight discrimination by discriminating. When are they going to put an end to these criteria that do more harm to universities than good for inclusion? The Honourable Minister of Innovation and Science. I want to make sure Quebecers watch. I bet you Quebecers are pulling their hair out. Imagine the Bloc is picking a fight over science.
I don't know about Quebecers, but Canadians want to listen to
I think
you.
they're at the back
Francois
of their
Philippe
playbook.
Champagne.
Finally deciding, oh, now it's time to pick a fight about funding for science. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to invest in our universities, in research and development, in science. We will help our young people because we know that today's science builds tomorrow's
Just get
economy.
out of the
we
way.
will continue investing
That's
in science,
what we need.
Mr.
We need
Speaker.
the government to get the hell out of the way. Get out of our lives. Get out of the economy.
Prime Minister overspending and
Stop trying to help because you're not.
Policies are pushing
You don't even
more
intend
farmers
to help.
into bankruptcy. According to the UPA, 1 in 5 farms can no longer afford to pay off their debt. With the help of the Bloc, the government is stifling our agricultural sector by blocking Bill C-234 and voting for more centralizing and inflationary spending. When will this government take our agricultural sector seriously and give it a break so it can feed our already starving population? The Honourable Minister and Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party knows full well that the price on pollution does not apply to Quebec, and he only needs to step forward 4 rows to speak to his leader if he wants to see Bill C-234 passed here in the House. It's the leader of the official opposition who determines the fate of that bill. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, what a typical response from the Liberal minister. They sit in their limos, out of touch with reality. Quebecers and Canadians are starving thanks to this Prime Minister and the Bloc. Clearly, they're not worth the cost. In my region, food bank use is at an all-time high.
This guy's an old friend of mine.
1 in 4 people. Over the past year, 10%
nice
of
see him on
farms
board
in the Chaudière-Appalaches region have gone under. When will this government finally get it and give our farmers the help they need?
Then I have
the Honourable Minister of Tourism. Mr. Speaker, as you know,
so what the hell is this Minister of Tourism doing up again?
In the
you think this is about tourism? The question was not about tourism.
One thing that can help all the regions, it's agriculture. We have supported
now she's an agriculture expert.
Processing and the transformation of farms, the green transition to make sure they contribute to net zero. Mr. Speaker, we are present in and operating in all areas of Quebec, and we will continue to be there to support this transition.
That's the problem. You operate in all areas of our lives. Get the hell out.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, more and more Quebecers are hungry and homeless. The inflation crisis hitting Canadians is the result of the centralizing and inflationary spending of this government, which is 100% Bloc-backed. The Bloc, which claims to defend the interests of Quebecers, voted in favor of $500 billion in budgetary appropriations, which are fueling inflation. So it's not just this Prime Minister who's not worth the cost, it's the Bloc too. Do the Bloc and the Liberals understand that the more money goes to Ottawa, the less money there is for Quebecers? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. I can say one thing that people watching at home will understand. They know that here on this side of the House, we're willing to invest in Canadians. People can see that the Conservatives' plan is to cut.
What a farce.
To cut all programs. They have the nerve to stand up today, and those watching will see that all the Conservatives who've stood up today voted against the Canada Child Benefit. They voted against
you bloody halfwit. There's not a program that you've announced or that you've developed or you've procured that does anything for ordinary Canadians. It's all for special interests. It's all. It all serves identity politics. That's all it's been doing. So just shut up for a while.
Island has saved more than $2 million in out-of-pocket costs since the launch of PEI's copay program last year. This federal funding for PEI has improved access to prescription drugs and made them more affordable for islanders. The success of this pilot can be replicated across the country.
Don't you hate these softball lobs?
Describe the impact that universal
he's going to ask the Minister of Death a question here. This is the softball for the euthanasia czar. I'd like to thank the member for his work on this file.
Well,
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to start by commending the advocacy and work of the member for Charlottetown, who's been working tirelessly to make sure
What did I tell
Islanders
you?
get the coverage they need, saving them hundreds of dollars. And I can tell you that in the many times I've been out with him in Prince Edward Island over the last 10 months, that getting to talk to
Offering
people,
made
what
to
that means,
people.
not just for affordability, but for prevention, to make sure they don't wind up with a chronic disease or illness. And I'll tell you, the
And then if they
Conservatives
do,
say
they
it's
can get
too much
made.
for people to hope that they can get the medicine that they need. They say it's too much to hope that somebody can get the dental care that we need.
Medicine they need.
100,000 people got
You can
dental
save
care in
hundreds of
just
thousands,
3
millions
weeks.
of dollars.
We are
Just put
getting
people
it
through
done.
MAID. Oh, we've already thought of that. Okay.
The honourable member from Leeds Grenville.
That guy is such a piece of baggage with arms and legs.
$1 green slush fund. The Prime Minister's hand-picked chair is being investigated for
Good
lining
one.
her own pockets and resigned in disgrace.
Good
After
one.
9 years of this NDP Liberal government, this Prime Minister clearly isn't worth the cost for that corruption. But another NDP Liberal appointed director has been caught funneling $42 million to companies that she has stakes in. The Liberals knew it, but then they promoted her to the infrastructure bank anyway. But wait, she suddenly resigned. They gave her keys to a bigger mansion after burglaring the first one. Will they investigate every dollar she handed out?
Yeah, this is it. Another resignation from another corrupt Liberal appointee.
Saying the Conservative Party of Canada going after any company, Mr. Speaker, that will work against climate change in this country. That's what these Conservatives are about, Mr. Speaker. Behind these questions, they're against new technology to help fight climate change. They know very well, and I've said it many times in this
Of
house.
new
The moment we
technology.
heard about delegation, we launched an investigation. The chair has resigned, the CEO has resigned. We are investigating. We're going to make sure that every dollar, Mr. Speaker, that is spent is going to be
Oh,
well
get
spent.
off
We're going to
it.
restore governance. We're going to restore confidence, and we're going to keep investing in Canadian companies, Mr. Speaker.
You're there to create this order. You know that.
The honourable member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands, Vita Lakes.
It's really too late that we only see the minister get animated after they get caught. Speaker, the NDP Liberal appointed chair and another director were caught stuffing their pockets full of taxpayer cash. They got caught. They resigned. They're being investigated.
They
But
should
then
be
a third
charged.
one who was found to be furthering her own interests was then appointed to the infrastructure bank, but suddenly resigned, much to the surprise of the minister responsible. This is life after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government. They have no idea where the money is going. We need to protect Canadian tax dollars. Will they call in the RCMP to investigate?
Why are these swine never charged? They steal taxpayer dollars and they're never charged.
Minister just answered, but while
Oh,
we're here and
shut
have some
up.
time, Mr. Speaker, I want to know why there is a woman in Aurora named Sabrina Maddow and another one, and they're both women, by the way. Her name
Yeah, I
is
can gather
Rachel
that.
Gilliland, alleging things that don't seem quite kosher in Conservative nomination land. And that is after the accusations.
You're bringing that
by
one
Ms.
up again?
Maddow of
What a
illegality
red
in the
herring.
Conservative nomination, and they just happen to be the only two women in that nomination race. Why?
Oh, it's because they're women, of course. What a clown that man is. Put on a clown suit, put on some makeup, and go to the circus because you don't belong anywhere else.
All honourable members, all ministers.
He really, people like that, they should move their fat asses out of the House of Commons and into a job that really would appreciate them. Something at the circus.
Especially all ministers understand that, of course, that when questions are asked, there should be about the administration.
I am so sick of these people. These overpaid, underemployed pieces of absolute worthless
The honourable member
flesh
from Vancouver,
doing
Ottawa.
nothing.
Oh, excuse me.
Excuse me.
The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Yeah, you've made lots of mistakes, but you're still sitting in that chair.
Turning a blind eye to Beijing's interference in our elections, his government was dragged kicking and screaming into calling a public inquiry. It has now been revealed that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet are obstructing the work of the inquiry by refusing to turn over documents to the Commissioner. A simple question: will the Prime Minister end the obstruction and turn over all documents requested by Madam Justice Hogue, unredacted, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister for Public Security.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend knows very well that there's no obstruction at all. He should have a word with his House Leader, with whom I worked very collaboratively all summer in setting up the Hogue Commission. We agreed to all the details of the terms of reference, including the fact that solicitor-client privilege and cabinet confidence were essential things that needed to be protected. And of course, the people that served in Mr. Harper's government would know the attachment Mr. Harper had to those principles. But our government went a step further and made available cabinet documents that were relevant to this inquiry, and will continue to do everything necessary to allow them to do their work. Hear, hear.
And now it is the turn of the member from Vancouver Quadra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government stands proudly on the side of Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But if elected, the opposition, the official opposition, could become the first federal government to create laws that knowingly violate Canadians' rights. They would do this by invoking the notwithstanding clause, trampling on our charter. As a parliamentarian, but even more as a Canadian, I find this simply chilling. Will the Minister of Justice please elaborate on the importance of protecting
Do you find the Online Arms Act chilling? No.
Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, the Charter protects your right to free expression. It protects your
And
right
you're
to
taking
worship
it
whom
away.
you choose. It protects your right to equality, and it protects your right to be presumed innocent. If you stand for freedom, you don't get to cherry pick which rights and freedoms you defend. But that's exactly what the Leader of the Opposition has said he would do. He has openly declared that he would use the notwithstanding clause to trample on these very charter rights. No federal leader has ever done this in Canadian history. Our government enacted the charter, our government stands by the charter, and we will always defend the charter rights and freedoms of every Canadian.
The Honourable
What
member
a
from Skeena,
complete
Bunkie Valley.
monstrous
Mr.
hypocrite.
Speaker, decades ago, the Liberals promised to stop the closure of rural post offices. But in classic Liberal fashion, they've broken that promise year after year after year. We've lost 500 rural post offices since 1994, 33 last year alone. And before the Conservatives start heckling, their record when they were in government was even worse. How many rural post offices are going to have to close before this minister finally does something?
Why don't you do something about it? You're propping up the Liberal government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member opposite because he speaks to a very relevant issue that's affecting Canada all across Canada, not just in his community, but everywhere. We're working closely with Canada Post to ensure that we change its ways so as we can improve delivery across the country. It's a serious issue. We recognize that. We're having deliberations over it. We're working closely with Canadians, and we're going to be spending more time to discuss how we can improve the operations of the organization to better serve Canada. Thank you.
The Honourable member from Spadina, Fort York.
Mr. Speaker, congratulations to the Liberal government. Congratulations on achieving the highest interest rates in 2 decades, on sustained high food prices not seen since the 80s, and reducing Canadian living standards to almost
This
the
guy
lowest
usually
levels
has something
in 40
good
years.
to say.
Mr. Speaker, spread out over 20 years and beyond the next election, Budget 2024 solves nothing. Yes, Mr. Speaker, Canada has come a long way since 2015. Unfortunately, it's in the wrong direction. Given a long list of failures, will the finance minister resign, take the entire cabinet with her, and go paint leadership posters for Mark Carney?
That's a good question.
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, our government is focused on keeping inflation low so that interest rates can come down. We have a fiscally responsible plan, and we will continue to maintain strong economic indicators, a AAA credit rating, the lowest net debt to GDP ratio in the G7, all the while having supports for
Good
Canadians
point,
in
Eileen.
Budget 2024, such as affordable housing, such as ECE and early childhood learning, such
numbers
as
dropping
supports
again.
for national school food program. Mr. Speaker, we have a comprehensive plan and we're compassionate. Thank you.
You're not compassionate, except for other liberals.
And so we come to the end of question period.
Well, that was And that was a little less stressful than yesterday for some reason. Maybe, I don't know why, but I found yesterday difficult to get through. Very, very difficult to get through. But anyway, thanks for watching today. It just amazes me how we're not hearing about the real issues. And you all name them in your comments. It's the WHO Pandemic Agreement, as it's now called. It's the Online Harms Act, which I have been talking about incessantly since this damn bill was introduced. It's the MAID program. It's digital currency and digital ID. These are things that are going to change our lives potentially forever if they're not stopped, and not for the good. They're going to take our freedom away, our political and our economic freedom away. And it's going to be entrusted, if you will, to a liberal government that cannot be trusted, or to the World Economic Forum and all the other globalist forces that are working with the liberal government here in Canada, with the conservative government in the UK, with the Democratic president in the United States, working very hard in Australia, which has become as crazy a Commonwealth country as any, even not here in Canada now. They're all working towards this globalist agenda to take our freedom away. And to see this Virani have the absolute gall to stand up and suggest abortion is threatened in this country where there is no law at all, and that Pierre Poilievre somehow wants to get to work on that as soon as he becomes prime minister, and to suggest that the Constitution and the Charter of Rights protects our free speech, that he wants to take away. He wants to destroy your free speech with the Online Harms Act. This man is a maniac. He's a monster. And he wants to do that, but he wants to suggest that somehow the conservatives are the real danger. People who disagree with the liberal government, they're the real danger. Those people who are doing independent media and new media, they're the real danger, because we got to get rid of them. We're going to censor them, and we're going to charge them under the Online Harms Act. Oh, it's really about protecting children, except it's not. So I tell you, we got our job cut out for us, but let's go back to the station, this show is all about. Yeah, think while it's still legal. Think while it's still legal, but resolve to resist. Thanks for watching today, folks. I'll be back with a show on how a gal is working with CSIS to go after parents who oppose gender ideology and Pride season. Read Pride Year all the time, 7 days a week. Bye for now, folks.